Chris Cuomo makes big news questioning the government's pandemic actions. And now he's admitting Joe Rogan was right? Has he had a moment of grace? Not so fast. Let's take a closer look. Welcome to Gracearchy.
Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka.
Hi, I'm Bill Protzman, your moderator. In a moment, we're going to talk about Chris Cuomo and his recent C+, yes, we're using acronyms here, admissions. But before we get to that, we're assisted here in our work by the Zero Aggression Project. And right now, you're consuming this show on your preferred platform. Please, click the button to subscribe right here. Believe it or not, the more people who subscribe, the more other people this platform will present it to. As you subscribe on this platform, you'll expose Gracearchy to additional listeners. And believe it or not, that's important to all of us. Chris Cuomo, the former CNN personality, surprised everyone with his comments about long C+, side effects from the big shot, and agreeing with Joe Rogan. Mm-hmm. He, too, is taking horse dewormer, but I don't know if our show about grace has much more to say except, huzzah, like hail, right? All of that. Hey, but before we go on, look, this is important. Neither Jim nor me, nor I, are physicians. We don't recommend anything. We don't offer medical advice. We don't in any way mean to imply that our opinions are those of the Zero Aggression Project. Our opinions are ours and ours alone. And if you're watching this right now, do please seek medical advice before making any medical choices. It's important. Okay, back to that comment about hooray, right? Hooray for what they did for us. Here's what I mean. So, same hotheads that prevailed a few years ago are now saying what needs to have been said in the first place, right? Except that back then, power stood in the way. And they're just bickering with one another about the whole thing instead of offering a forward-focused notion about what policy ought to be. You've said this before, and I want to echo it right now. This is the new media game. It's bait and click, right? And it's not about the facts. This is a thirst trap for all of our very numb skulls.
Yeah, I do. You know, you want to say hooray, you want to say huzzah, but as we said at the beginning, not so fast. I was listening. We play the intro. We hear the intro just like the audience does every time we get together, and it says system seems almost scientifically grounded in making you small, powerless, and weak. And gosh, those words are going to especially resonate today. They really are. And so I want to say up front about the analysis we're going to provide about Chris Cuomo's big admissions is that they did not represent a change of mind or heart. This isn't a road to Damascus experience. I do want to hearken back to a discussion that we had about this before. We had Pastor Dave Brisbane on. We did a series of episodes with him. We did a 3-parter. And then we delivered a bonus episode. It's the only episode that on any YouTube platform received a ban. It was lifted after 4 hours, thanks to Bill's quick work on another network, not on the Zero Aggression Project Network, but the YouTube took it down. And in that episode, Dave and I talked about the fact that we approached the question of big shot, which is the term we will use instead of the one that tends to get you deplatformed. There are clips that will be played where the word will be used. You know what I'm talking about. It was the thing that you got during the thing, right? During the time that people had this sickness around the world. We call it big shot. I'm not going to use the actual term because we're trying to steer clear of the censors. You're smart enough to follow. We had both made a different decision. My decision was not. I like to say I'm still in the control group.
I love that.
And his decision was, and we both explained in that episode, which we will link in the show notes, we both explained why we arrived at that decision. And we both even argued that we felt Spirit led to the position that we were at, although Dave made an interesting admission in the course of that show. And why both paths were potentially valid. And so that's where I come at this. In fact, the entire discussion here today comes at this from a lens very similar to the conversation we had with Pastor Dave. By the way, you already did it. We're not going to call it the disease. We're not going to name the disease here. We're going to try to use the term C+. Again, you're smart enough to follow what we're saying here. And we are not making any medical advice. My not taking it does not mean you shouldn't have taken it, nor that you shouldn't take it in the future. That is not the point of this episode today.
Oh, right. So we're doing something a little bit different. And we're using Chris.
Hey.
We're using Chris Cuomo. Some like to say Cuomo. I always think of Perry Como when I say Como. Sorry about that. Old guys rule. So here we go. Chris Cuomo is now a regular paid guest, by the way, of the PBD podcast, a show hosted by Patrick Bet David. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. Stuff happens there, right? So what we want to do today is take apart some of Cuomo's comments on that show that caused a stir. So we're going to review probably our second ever reaction video, clip by clip, right, Jim?
Yes. This is only the second time we've done this, and we will provide the link to the original episode because we will not be playing the episode in its entirety here. We're going to comment on specific parts of it that we're going to play for you. If you want to see whether or not I dealt honestly here, if you want to see whether or not we were graceful here, if you want to see whether or not there was additional context, you will have the entire clip. It runs nearly 20 minutes. You will have that, and you can go check us out for yourself. You can check us out by watching the clip, which, again, we will include in the show notes.
Awesome. So you want to set up clip one?
No, let's just go straight into it. I just will say it's about 1 minute and 29 seconds that we're going to be gone watching it here with letting you watch it, and then we'll comment on it.
Okay, so what you're about to see actually happened on the PBD podcast, but he is playing a clip of a former interview that Cuomo did as part of his show. So here we go.
Know that about you, Byron Donald. You are not telling people to get vaccinated. You are not pushing it. You are not saying it's the right choice. You're saying you're not doing it and your family's not doing it, and you're leaving out of the equation that you can make other people sick, as if that doesn't matter. Okay?
Chris, did you not just hear my answer 30 seconds ago where I said if you want to be protected from these variants and the original strain, please go get vaccinated? I promote you to do that. I just told you live on your own show that if you want to get vaccinated in America, go do it. But if there are Americans like myself who choose not to, please don't berate me for doing that. That is a personal choice I have made. It's my own healthcare. I am allowed to do that. I'm entitled to do
Byron,
that.
You're absolutely right to do it. You have a right to do it. Two different statements. Okay? Do you have the right? Of course, nobody's debating that except you guys as a false choice. What I'm saying is it right to do it? Have you spoken to a doctor? You're supposed to be a leader. Have you talked to the CDC and the people who are in Florida at the Department of Health about whether or not they think you made a good choice? Because if your answer is just then, well, I don't care what they say. This is me. I'm an American. That is being dumb as a proxy for being bold. And I don't think it's a good message because remember, it's not just you protecting yourself.
Let me say this.
It's you protecting me and other people from you. That's why you get vaccinated, not just for yourself. Important distinction.
So what you see here on full display is something that I consider counter to grace, and that is shame. There's an attempt to shame. Shame is not particularly persuasive. It tends to have a boomerang effect, a backfire effect to it. It's how we deal with a lot of problems in this country. It's how our government functions. It's the step right before the force that they use in many cases. You see it on full display here. and this isn't even the worst example. We're not going to play all the examples. I don't want to get into it, but it's not even close. You can go on YouTube and find them because other people are commenting about this particular interview that this and one other interview that Chris Cuomo has had. And they're playing clips showing how he behaved while he was at CNN. There's a clip with him and Don Lemon, for example, where they're very, very proud to be on the side where they're taking lifestyle options away from other human beings. So this is a program of advocating shame and using ridicule and piling on loss of freedom on top of that. They wanted you to rat out your neighbors. They wanted movement restrictions. They wanted loss of access to public venues. That meant no concerts in your life. They wanted censorship. They still are running the disinformation, misinformation, malinformation trifecta at us in a pretty constant pace. But we now know that it was going on behind the scenes as well as in front, and they were advocating for it on the front end. And we have said that here, we have to use different terminology to try to reduce the number of times we say a word, so we reduce the amount of times we risk getting struck. And I will tell you that a strike is serious, because when you get 3 strikes on this on the main channel that we're on, you're out. And it's the biggest access audience that's being taken away from you. And if you don't have a huge audience and capital reservoir, you will not survive that. And that's what Chris Cuomo and his allies did. They also advocated, supported, worked alongside taking jobs away. And not just jobs from first providers, jobs from people who were the heroes at the start of this crisis. Right? People that we were told repeatedly we had to salute. I turned on the NFL draft in 2020 and they wasted almost 15 minutes at the beginning of the show. And they were focused on, we have all these heroic first responders who just a year and a half later, if you didn't get along with the program, you lost your job. It didn't matter if something bad was going to happen to you, or you had some sense that this was going to hurt you. The heck with you. And that's part of what Chris Cuomo is now exposing. Glad for that. But first providers. So this, just think about this for a moment. These, in some cases, these are nurses who worked with C+ patients in the hospital, who may have even already gotten sick themselves. And we pretended that there was no way that natural forms of protection. I don't even want to use the I word. Natural forms of protection were that had been in existence for thousands of years, and everybody understood these things. Didn't matter. They stole proms and funerals and so many other things. In fact, they lied about damn near everything. And when they say the royal they includes Chris Cuomo and his brother Andrew, who was then governor of New York. These are part of the people I'm inherently talking about when I say the royal they. These guys are central casting. And almost certainly on various platforms, including the TubeU, there'll be a latest info from a certain government agency clipped and appended on to this podcast to tell you a warning that you shouldn't believe what it is that we're saying here. You got to double check us. When we invite you to do that all the time, we are staring at proposals. We were staring at the time at proposals for a national ID card or a national ID app in our phone that we would have to carry around, that was going to give away not just, listen, this was going to open up a real Pandora's box. Initially, they were just going to put one piece of medical data on there. And that was whether or not you got big shot.
Yep.
But before long, how many other things? How long before we turned into China? How long before we had a regime like the Chinese Communist Party that was incentivizing and managing behavior as if the state is a parent and you are just a child, and they have every right to impose any rule because they said so?
I'm part of that slippery slope here in California. We could volunteer to become part of the California Big C tracker database. And because of the kinds of volunteer work that I do, I did that. And who knows what information they've got on me. You raise a great question about medical records. It's very difficult if you use multiple medical providers to have all your data centralized. And unfortunately, the state is the only way to do that.
But Bill, it would be so much better if we could centralize your data, because then we could better manage you.
And you know what I'm saying on this, right?
I do. I want to say one more thing about this clip before we move on. The phrase that jumped out at me the most in the entire clip was the following, and I quote, "Dumb as a proxy for bold," end quote. Dumb as in name calling, as a proxy for bold, as a character trait.
Right.
Now, the very first thing I thought of, because I'm fairly resilient, I'm pretty sure Brian Donalds, who was going through that, is too, and anybody that chooses to get into that political game has got to be resilient. I'm rubber and you're glue, bounce off me, sticks to you, right? It's a childhood thing, and that's, good. But dumb as a proxy for bold. So I do an episode like this that has a conflict machine title in it that's designed to catch people and get them to watch, to use this moment as an educational moment, because I recognize people operate in this conflict machine and the media agenda setting. And so we're sitting here commenting, not on news, but on the news of the news. I'm using this as a teaching moment to get into something deeper, not just who said what, but what it means, what is actually going on beneath the surface. And I was particularly moved by this because in my professional life, I feel like Cassandra. Cassandra's this famous prophetess who, she would say, hey, this is what's going to happen. And then nobody would believe her. It's the curse that no one believes the prediction, even though the prediction is true. And there are ways to know things. In fact, that's going to happen repeatedly. We're going to have a discussion about Chris Cuomo's epistemology. I'm going to have to keep teasing you throughout the episode because it really hits hard near the very end of the clips we're going to review. Really hits hard. But it keeps coming up as an issue that he has a specific epistemology. I have a very different one. And he thinks he can claim that there's no way I could have known, or no way you could have known, what you should or shouldn't do in various situations. Because his epistemology system, which I'm going to cover with you, was superior. And frankly, it's not. And in fact, we're even going to show the illogic of his argument. He himself exposes, he himself falsifies it in his own words and doesn't seem to realize it. So let's move on to the next clip.
Actually, the way vaccines work are to protect yourself. A vaccine basically gives you a special cocoon where you actually limit the worst harmful effects of the virus itself, or may not get it altogether, depending on your own personal physiology. So that's the way vaccines work. Now, to me personally, I did talk to a couple of doctors that I know about it. I told them I already had it, and I'm 42. What do you think? And they said, yeah, you're fine. If that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. They didn't come and say, no, you have to do it because of everybody else. Because if other people want to be protected, they have access to vaccines. Go get the vaccine. I would never tell anybody not to get vaccinated.
I don't want to spend any time today, I really don't, on how Big Shot works. But let me just say, it wasn't a V.
Yes.
It was a gene therapy. It was an RNA tool. It's the first of its kind out of the box. This is a profound piece of technology that has a huge amount of promise. It was under-tested. We have an FDA regime where it can take 7 to 10 years to get a drug to market. That didn't happen here, folks. That is an obvious factual statement. And that's all Byron Donalds is saying, is that, hey, can I wait? Can I wait? Can I see what the results are?
And you just watch Chris Cuomo shaking his head the whole time, like
the whole time, and interrupting and lecturing, all of it. There was very little room for his guest to speak. I had a professional associate who took the P version of Big Shot,
right,
and he took it as soon as he was able. As soon as his group opened up, he was at the doctor's office getting it. He and his future wife. Both were there. We were on a business trip together in July of 2021, and several people came home from that business trip sick, including him. And he got one of the worst cases of it. He got really sick. It laid him out good. He got the big shot and got it. And I will tell you, it radicalized him. It radicalized him. After he had this experience, he's like, they lied to me. They told me at the very time that I was getting big shot that it was going to stop me from getting it. And not 2, maybe 3 months later, laid up.
Well, that's an outright lie. It doesn't prevent anything.
Well, this is the thing. There's been some gaslighting since. You will find people, in fact, they may even respond in the comments or they here in the video that'll say that claim was never made. But it was, not once, not 10 times, 1,000 times, and on some of the biggest platforms, including the Rachel Maddow show. I wrote about it at the time. So the next thing that happens here, the next clip we're going to go into, is that Chris is asked what's changed from then till now, because he's doing something different now. He's engaged in a message that is contradictory, whether he wants to admit it or not, to what his position was, his rather strident propagandist position at CNN. He is now doing something different. So let's roll that clip.
Okay, so here he is. Now we're back to the real show, and Chris is a paid guest.
Yes.
Here we go.
A lot has changed, and a lot needs to change that hasn't. Here's what matters to me about the clip. Apology? Of course not.
What?
Apology.
Tech, please.
What?
Yes. No apology.
No apology.
No apology. And I'm not alone in this. So I thought about doing an instant grace just on this one statement, because I had seen another clip elsewhere, not this full clip we're sharing. I had seen another clip on another show commenting about it. And I was like, whoa, somebody needs to say something about the fact that he flat out says he's not apologizing. And I thought that was interesting. And I want to have an extended conversation about what an apology means after one of the future clips. But let me say right here up front, I thought, okay, instant grace, I'll do 5 minutes in the studio on this. I end up turning into a whole show after I see the entire thing.
5 minutes isn't enough.
But this is why we're at the Gracearchy moment. The number one reason, I already shared my Cassandra thought, but the number one reason is that there is actually no apology here. And I'm not alone. Dave Smith has identified. Dave Smith, the comedian, has identified this as well and did this in his podcast over the weekend. And he has a relationship with Patrick Bet-David, and they've now announced at the end of the month there will be a debate between Chris Cuomo and Dave Smith. Now, I'm not a huge fan of debates. I'll just be honest. I've said this before. They tend to exhibit far more heat than light. It's about winning as opposed to getting at the truth. But it is interesting that this dynamic is going to happen. But I can't bring myself to say, well, okay, he's finally getting it, as if that's enough. I got to be honest.
Whoa. You mean you think Chris, that Cuomo's had a change of heart?
No, that's what I'm saying. I can't bring myself to say this yet.
I don't think so at all.
Because of the fact that the apology's missing, and because of other stuff we're going to cover as the episode unfolds.
Yeah, I agree with you. No change.
Let me just say flat out, he doesn't agree with us.
He's doing it for money.
And I have had a position that I've been in, and I've made very public comments along the way throughout the international health crisis we experienced. I made comments starting from the very day that they put us in our homes and limited our travel. Not going to use the L word either. And I was commenting from that point on, and I wrote a bunch of stuff, and I made public statements, and I appeared in interviews. And so I have a public trail following me of things I said, predictions I made, not all of which came true, by the way, but you put mine up against Chris Cuomo's, night and day. My epistemology is far better than his. Part of the reason I do this show, so this gets back to the Cassandra thing, is that my epistemology is better. And I believe we should try to stop bad things from happening before they happen. I think we should try to learn from the examples of history and not repeat mistakes. And in his worldview does not accommodate that.
No, it's like leveraging mistakes for fun and profit.
But you're going to see where he accuses people like me of being ignorant, of being political posers, of inventing some kind of rebel stance. He already did it once in an earlier clip we played. But somehow or other, magically, he is on the path of discovery. He is right in the right spot at exactly the right time of development and did it exactly the right way. And he has exactly the right level of claims for the moment. And he is just so angelically perfect against this. So when I say
there's a bridge for sale in New York, right?
When I say epistemology, I want to be clear because it's a big, $5 word. When I say epistemology, what I mean is standard of truth. Epistemology is the study. So we see anytime it says ology, it's study. The study of why something is true. What's the standard for determining it is or isn't true? So I really, there's an epistemological discussion to be had here. It's fundamental. It's at the base. Mine permits grace. His does not. Mine has a better track record. His does not. He's a Johnny-come-lately who, by the way, as he's doing it in the defiant pose, the real rebel here is him. In the defiant pose, he's taking advantage of an opportunity other people have opened to him. And he's like, there's market to capture here. I'm going to show you where he does this exactly. I'm going to show the exact point in the interview where he admits this. So let's go on to the next thing, where he actually comments now on why he treated Byron Donalds the way he treated him.
I believe as a leader at that time, you had a duty to be thorough in what you were putting out there as opposed to just playing politics, okay? This was never as simple as vaccine good, vaccine bad. Politics made it that.
I agree with the fundamental premise. Might be the only time I'm going to agree with Mr. Cuomo in this entire podcast, but I agree with the fundamental premise. So Jesus uttered the statement that if a teacher misleads, causes a child to stumble, right? So there's this balance, there's this imbalance of information versus ignorance, teacher versus student. That it would be better if they had a millstone tied around their neck, in other words, a very heavy weight, and they were thrown in the lake, drowned. It'd be better if they were drowned on purpose than it would be if they misled somebody, caused them to stumble. Meaning that the role of teacher, and lots of pastors are aware of this command. They don't necessarily follow it, but they're aware of it. That they have a duty to impart the truth carefully, to have done their homework. Okay? So I want to say up front, this is something I have people who have known me for 20 years know this. I have friends who've known me for 20 years who've known that I've talked about this openly in the setting of being a Sunday school teacher, in the setting of the work that I did at Downsize DC, that there was a responsibility that came with being in a teaching or leadership position. And I believe that this is especially keenly important in two arenas. We're already touching on one, which is kind of the religious space, the spiritual guidance space. There's a lot of room for manipulation there. But there's one other place that tends to get overlooked in this analysis. And it's, I'd harken back to the interview we did with Jerry Boyer. It's the political class.
It's the political class, yeah.
It's the political class who have an outsized authority granted to them, not just on the basis of force, but also that they are the supreme experts on what is or is not right. So I agree with him that matters, okay? But then he shifts and says, politics made the situation bad. Again, as if he is not involved in politics, as if he was not central to the conflict machine, not a central cast player. He and his brother, who worked in tandem together at his own network, and then in the state of New York, carrying out policies. And I want to say to him, politics didn't make it that. The combination of tribalism and aggression did. So the state is a gun aimed at people, saying you will do what we want or else. That's what it brings. Anything else can be done by persuasion. Anything else can be done by me trying to convince you of the merit of my case. Okay, I could offer you incentives. I could show you why I can do a comparison, a balance sheet, show you why it's to your benefit. But that's how we do almost everything we do in the society. Bill, if you didn't show up to do the podcast today, would you have been shot?
It depends on who's governing the podcast. Not by you, although I know that you're concealed carry.
Yes,
that's a lousy reason to use the gun.
No, there's no way that we do so many things every single moment of the day voluntarily.
Because we're persuaded to do it because we want to.
So I want to say before we go into the next clip, we knew to be suspicious. We had a sense, and some of the suspicion has to do with this manipulation, this coercion. We're going to say a lot more about that, but we knew to be suspicious. Let's roll the next clip.
There's no curiosity about the vaccine. You get a VAERS system, which is very imperfect, and you don't have robust government dialogue or investigation of the vaccine. You don't have political investigation of what happened during the pandemic, what was right, what was wrong, to Vinny's point about what's still continuing about who wants to control what, because they only see politics. They only see advantage.
Okay, well, I just want to say, right up front, full disclosure, I appreciate the VAERS reference. I appreciate what he said there. The amount, the quality and the amount of reporting that goes on in the VAERS system previous to this international crisis was poor.
Can we just review that? Because it's not an acronym that I picked up right away.
VAERS, VAERS. It is a reporting system for side effects after you get any type of
shot. Yeah, okay.
Any type of shot, right? And it's lame. It's lame. He's right to point this out. But he's rest of the
he's not even walking anything back. He's just saying something completely the opposite of where he was.
Okay, but he's still trying to describe. He's saying that there's a lack of curiosity because of politics. He's expanding on the previous point, and I want to say this is fundamentally a flaw in his epistemology. And I'm going to tell you, I engage in what I call heuristic thinking, which is that I have certain rules of thought that I apply to situations, and I keep testing them again and again. And if something doesn't work, maybe there's a problem with my premise in that particular case, right? And I need to go back and check my premises. Well, he's trying to say, well, politics is uncurious. Well, politics by nature curiosity isn't an inherent part of politics, right? There is something politics is curious about. What's going to sell? What's going to get me votes? What's going to hurt my opponent? Beyond that, it doesn't matter. And so Harry Brown astutely pointed out when he was running in 96 and 2000, he astutely pointed out that every time we take a question that was scientific and we give it to the government, it becomes a political question to be decided to the advantage of the party, of the politician who is addressing it at that moment. And at the time, those politicians were people like Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. So they were the ones that would be resolving these questions. They would do it for their own political benefit, not because it was a scientific question anymore. It no longer was, because it got pulled out of science and got moved into politics, which operates under inherently different rules.
How do we allow this? As
we not only allow it, we encourage it, we cheer it.
Yes, we cheer it. We actually succumb to it.
Yeah, the whole nation cheers it. I mean, if we were looking at the balance of the population, the overwhelming majority, a super majority of people actually encourage this kind of behavior. So, I am a voice crying out in the wilderness right now. I really am.
You and Representative, what's his name? Byron.
Well, maybe. I don't know what the rest of Byron's record is like. He's got an R after his name. We'll see. I don't know enough about him. In this particular instance, maybe. So, but as for it being curiosity, it remains a tribal matter to this day. In the extended interview, one of the clips we're not going to play today, Chris Cuomo talks about how it's come back to him, and there will be something I reference about that, but he actually expands on this lack of curiosity question. But here's the thing. Here's the irony. He's partially responsible for that And what bothers me here is he's not acknowledging it. He's not acknowledging his role in suppressing curiosity. Just go back to the first clip. Shame is an anti-curious mode. He is engaging in shame. This is anti-curiosity. Shame says, I don't have to consider your view. I don't have to consider your opinion. My mind's made up. Please don't confuse me with any facts you have, because you shouldn't even be doing. You're not right. So he's still engaging in this behavior right in front of your very eyes, in your own lying ears. You can hear it. Okay, let's talk about forgiveness for a second. I want to talk about this. There's a sticky issue in the realm of forgiveness. There's a sticky issue in the realm of forgiveness.
How
And that
so?
is, well, people wonder about what forgiveness means. So if I forgive someone, okay, all I have done is inside myself, I have said, I am not going to hold on to a grudge. But
Sure.
if you come to me and you say, gee, Jim, I'm really sorry. You know, I messed up and I'm really sorry about what I did. And then I say back to you, I forgive you. What I'm providing you at that moment is pardon.
Okay.
So there's a difference between forgiveness and pardon.
Yes.
So I want to be clear that I can forgive Chris Cuomo for everything that he's doing here. He knows not what he do. But he has not come, he has not engaged, and here's another term, repentance, so
Right.
that he can come back and receive pardon.
Right.
That's not what he's done. And the purpose of him coming and seeking repentance for the benefit of getting pardon is that we become reconciled to one another. There is at-one-ment,
There you go.
atonement.
Yes.
So he is not looking to reconcile with people he very clearly almost spits in disdain at, which were the people that figured this out before him.
Right.
And the thing that they figured out is that there may be side effects to the big shot, and that there is such a thing as long C+. And he found this out at precisely the right moment. It's fake. You're posers. You had a rebel stance that was based on just being anti-government. So you didn't really have any knowledge. You're just a big jerk face. I, on the other hand, came at this much better and at just the right time. After we have at least 30,000 people who have been harmed in a way significant enough that they were hospitalized.
You're saying I as if you were speaking for Chris.
For Chris. That's what
Just
he's
to be
saying.
clear.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. He has done this correctly. Everybody before him has not. There is no pardon for someone who has not requested reconciliation through repentance. I am not withholding my forgiveness for him, and I want to be abundantly clear about that. I don't even want anybody to pick up and throw a stone at it. I want at him. This isn't about him. This is about what the truth is and how we arrive at the truth. And it's an object lesson for all of us to see. It's an object lesson for all of us to see. I want everyone to understand. If you remember nothing else I say today, I want you to understand that there is a difference between forgiveness and pardon. I am not pardoning him. I cannot, because he has not repented and requested it. But I can forgive him, and I hope you will too. All right. By the way, we had a whole podcast that we did about the lab, right?
Yes,
and
the
where
lab.
where this all may have come from. And we will link to that in the notes, but we talked about the notion of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a solution going forward. The idea that people who were engaged as part of the conspiracy coming forward and giving full allocated confession, and in return for full allocated confession, they received full pardon. They were reconciled to the group. This is based on the end of apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I believe you have to ask for pardon to get pardon, but you don't have to ask forgiveness to get it. I let you off the hook because, by the way, I don't want to live in grudge land. I don't want the mental health duress that comes with that. I want to be a person who moves on forward with hope about the future, and maybe even the potential hope that one day you, who has offended me, will come back to the fold and seek reconciliation. I want to make sure I'm 100% open to that when the moment happens. So when he's ready to do that, I'm ready for him to do it. but it hasn't happened yet, as you're going to see. Let's do the next clip. We're running on time.
I don't have long vaccine. People are saying I've admitted long vaccine.
Oh, okay.
People are saying I've admitted that the vaccine hurt me. I have not admitted that. I don't know that.
So this is really important. This is where it's boomeranged on him. The very system that the Royal Day is part of, the other tribe has rushed to judgment here. I just got to take a moment to call out the people on the other side. I saw tons of headlines in various publications. I saw tons of videos. They went for the conflict, and so they put words in his mouth that he didn't actually say. I went and looked because there were 2 or 3 that actually cited what the source of it was. But when you go and watch the actual video where they claim he made the statement, and you watch it twice, and you watch it a third time, he never actually says that he has that big shot resulted in his situation. But that's what was being claimed in headlines all over the place. The interview in question happened on his other show, News Nation. It was with Sean Barkavage, who is a nurse practitioner who was hospitalized after taking Big Shot and cannot to this day get medical professionals to take his situation seriously. They have used a host of anti-scientific justifications on this fellow and others like him. And it is a good thing. Let's just put this out on the table that Chris Cuomo is beginning to expose these stories. But here is Chris Cuomo's exact words in that setting, and I'm going to change any words that I believe this platform will ban me for using. We know that Big Shot can have unintended consequences, aka side effects, but nobody's really talking about it because they're too afraid of blame. And they just want it to go away. But the problem is people like Sean and me and millions of others who still have weird stuff with their blood work and their lives and their feelings, physically are not going away, end quote. Did he say at any time in that, and I'm challenging all the other people who've used the conflict to try to get clicks, did he ever say that the Big Shot caused him to have long C+? The answer, or the effects of similar effects, the answer is no. There is never a time. He's right to say this, but here he has what he believes are long-term side effects. He talks extensively in this even in this clip and elsewhere about the fact that his doctors are telling him that he has this issue. And the other thing that the other tribe is doing is pretending like he's just started doing this just in the last month.
Right. Like this is brand new for him.
He's been doing this since October of 2022. He's been the very first time he raised this question that I could find was October of 2022. Now he's already gone from his previous employer at CNN when he does it. So I would argue that there was a lack of courage in his doing this. He waited until after he left and after the opportunity had been paved by other people to raise and address this question. But he was already talking about this. So he is part of a system, Bill, part of a system that propagandized the public and was not willing to allow other points of view to enter into the dialogue, that did nothing but shame, marginalize that position 101%. They went the extra if that's what they had to do it. And he's saying, well, people aren't being fair to me now. Well, it's part of a system you created, bud. It's part of a system you created. These people are bad. What they're doing is wrong, but it's part of a system you built. Okay.
Yep. So he was not bold when it happened.
Right. So now this next clip, he's going to claim that people in the government are now calling him and basically asking him to stop. Let's play that clip.
They say, hey, Chris, easy on the long COVID. We don't know that it's a thing. We don't know. We're still trying to figure it out. It could be other things, autoimmune. So I'm saying my doctors say I have long COVID. I have the symptoms. They showed me my blood work, scared the bejesus out of me to see this glowing micro clot stuff that they see in my blood. It really shook me up.
And you know what? That's how science is done. We should be easy on any claims that we make, especially when those claims are causation. In any realm, this is true in legal forensics as well. In any realm, it is very hard, very, very hard to arrive at causation. And the closer you get to causation, here's a heuristic for you, the more humility you should show. Now, I want to go all the way back to the beginning with Byron Donalds. Did you hear humility or did you hear shame? Did you hear certainty or did you hear careful, cautious, qualified language? So
From which one?
From Chris Cuomo.
Oh.
The bigger the claim you're making, the more evidence you need. Causation is very often impossible to find, but it's at a best extremely difficult. And when you get there, you have to say with caution what you're saying. You have to be cautious until it is just solid. It is always the case that X leads to Y, and you can prove that, but you can't always do that. The very thing he's going to accuse other people of doing, he's about to accuse other people of doing here, of not having any knowledge. The thing that he accused Byron Donalds of at the time, of not having any specific knowledge to make his claim, also meant the reverse. It meant that big assertive claims couldn't be made. So the smaller, I'm not sure I want to do this claim, has more validity than the big you must do it claim. It's just how life works. We may not like that inconvenient fact. It may not have suited our agenda at that given moment, but it is the fact. It is the fact. So I'm skipping some stuff, but he talks about the fact that his doctors have to be in an international consortium and to work on the problem that he's now interested in. And I want to play this next clip with just that bit of setup.
They have to do it themselves because the government's not giving them any guidance. The vaccine is a really important conversation that's being ignored. I do not fault myself for telling people at the time what the government was giving us as best practices. People say, but your job is to question. On what basis?
Okay. On what basis? I'm going to provide the basis for you before we're done. I'm going to provide the basis because this man was paid millions and millions of dollars and didn't know his own job. Okay. So I am going to give you that basis before we're done because I happen to know what his job was. And I happen to know how he was supposed to practice it. And when I say it, you're going to go, yeah, of course, duh. We're going to cover that. And it's been known. What I'm going to say has been known for hundreds of years. It's not new. It's not new. So on the basis, we can explain what he's supposed to be doing. But let's talk about why the government did or didn't give him any guidance. Now we're at the point where we can begin discussing Chris Cuomo's epistemology, his standard of truth. You want to know what it is? It boils down to 4 words. 4 words. You ready for them?
Yeah, bring it.
Because government says so. Because government says so, this is what you should believe. Because government says so. And he does this repeatedly throughout this entire interview. If you play the full clip and turned it into a drinking game, the number of times that he says, this person said it, or that expert, or I consulted with this one, or I had access to the other one, or we were repeating what they were telling us. If you just went through all the instances where he tells you, this is my epistemology, he is practically screaming, this is his epistemology. If you counted those and you took a sip of his hard alcohol, you'd have to be hospitalized by the time we were done. You wouldn't be drunk. You'd be way past that point. I'm not making a claim that's too big for the evidence here. His epistemology is government says so. That's it. So, how can we know that Long C is not being taken seriously? This is where the contradiction starts to arrive. Because he now is contradicting, wait for this, the government. And he just said it to you. After telling you that they were the standard of authority, and he'll do it again repeatedly. This isn't the last time he's going to do it in this interview. He keeps doing it. He's now going to say, how can we know? I got all these testimonies of people that the government is not taking seriously. In other words, the government has not told him. In fact, go back to the previous clip, and he's saying, well, I've got people in the government telling me to stop talking about this.
Yep, right there.
So he is exposing the weakness in his own epistemology. Let me give you another piece of evidence. How did he know he should berate Byron Donald, ridicule Joe Rogan, which he also did, etc.? Because the government told him so. The government told him so. There were actors in government that told him that this is what he should do. He admits openly where he was getting his information during the course of this interview. He gives a litany as if he's proud of it, of who he was relying on for expertise and counsel. And it is consistently the government says so. I mean, across the board. But now he's like, well, I'm not, at the time, I was justified in doing this to Byron. Byron didn't have any special insight, right? Byron's a jerk. Byron's not, he was doing it for the wrong reasons. I'm doing it for the right reasons. And you're going to see Joe Rogan's going to come up shortly. You're going to find out this is the interview that got the most clips on YouTube. You're going to see how he deals with Joe Rogan. But they accused Joe Rogan of some pretty stupid, heinous behavior because the government told him so. But now there's a reversal that's occurring throughout this interview. There's a reversal in what he's choosing to cover as programming, where he is admitting that the government is not infallible. So he actually should check his premises. That's what I'm saying here. I'm saying his epistemology. I'm pointing out the flaw in it. The self-admitted flaw. The flaw that Chris Cuomo, is sharing with us. So on what basis? Let's get into that for just a second. Let's do it. On what basis? There's a classic phrase in journalism. Used to be taught, used to be well known, not that long ago, in my lifetime. Afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted. A lot of journalists believed their job was to challenge authority, was to go in, and when a statement was said, in fact, by the very virtue of the fact that a government spokesman stood up and said it, somebody ought to go, wait a minute, I know this might come as a shock. I know you might be surprised to hear this, but that might have been a political claim designed to gain them political advantage. Oh, in this, because no one's ever heard this thought before. Shock. Man, careful. I hope you're sitting down as you hear this one. Politicians tend to lie. They've done it from time to time, right? So we had this thing that we called the fourth estate. It was the idea that there were three separate branches of government, but we actually considered the journalists, the media, the people who brought you the news to be giving you a piece of information that you needed so that you knew how to participate as a citizen in a democracy. Because ultimately you were going to rule on whether or not these were the right people doing the right things in the right ways, under budget, on time. You were going to get a chance to rule on that. And you needed to be informed. The experts didn't tell. It didn't come down from on high like it was on chiseled tablets. It was the people that were supposedly in charge. And so the fourth estate was your tool because you were out working. So you needed somebody who was doing the investigative work to come home and tell when you got home and you turned on the evening news or you opened the newspaper, you could then find out what the truth was. And in order to get at that, there had to be a presumption, not a benefit. Hear me carefully. A presumption of doubt, not a benefit. When a government spokesperson set up, there should be challenge. Afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted. We did an episode about Truth About War. The basis of that story was that the entire American media was not telling the American people because they had war fever, and war was going to be a lot of fun for their business. It was going to be great for their ratings, especially a nascent network that not everybody was watching yet called CNN.
Yeah, I remember Wolf Blitzer.
That's where he became famous.
Yep. And why he became famous.
So that series of events led to a lot of the media that we have today. They were not telling the truth about the Gulf War. They weren't telling the truth about the Iraq War. Truth About War was about the later Iraq War. We already had the record of lies about the Gulf War, which were being repropagated and repeated with some new mix. And it was all fake and it was all false. And truthaboutwar.org still there to this day for people to see me in action, me being Cassandra, me not being heard, me even getting death threats, me having radio ads that were run out of cities. We told that whole story in a previous episode about Truth About War. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Okay. So the media didn't do its job then, and Chris Cuomo didn't do his job in this most recent international health scare. He did not do his job then. He was a propagandist. He was a stenographer. He was not someone who afflicted, who afflicted the comfortable. He worshipped them.
If maybe that was his job. If his job was carrying the government's water bucket, he was doing it.
Well, it's not the job that it's presented to be. We actually still continue to call it the news.
Yes,
they even call themselves the news. They say they're the cable news network.
Yep.
It's not news.
It's not
propaganda.
News. It's propaganda.
Right. Okay. So, but I just, he says on what basis? With total incredulity, with the seeming innocence of a child, a mere babe in the woods, who didn't know this was his job. He's in the top of the food chain pay-wise and didn't know this was his job. How did he get where he got? We're not going to go down that rabbit trail. But think about it just, logically. How did he get where he got? It wasn't by telling the truth.
I'll tell you something else that's going to get you a lot of hits. I am taking a, what do they call it? Like a regular dose, whatever. They're trying to build up of ivermectin. Ivermectin was a boogeyman early on in COVID.
Okay. This clip made the rounds. It's probably the most famous clip from this entire thing. In part 2 of it's coming up in a moment, but I just want to stop here and I want to say a couple of things. Quote, "We were given bad information about ivermectin." Maybe that's even one of the bad words we shouldn't say. This is his epistemology cropping up again. Here it is. Here's yet another example. Who gave him bad info? Well, the government, members of the government.
Right.
And this doesn't make any logical sense. Chris Cuomo, why should we continue to listen to the government when they give bad information like this? Such patently, inherently bad information. Yes, why should we listen?
Right there.
The only way to know anything is to believe proven liars. That's what he's advocating here. They were lying at the time. They're still engaged in a lack of curiosity and concealment. He's already explained all this. And now he's saying, you know what? We have to listen to the experts. He's maintaining this faith in the politicized experts. The best thing we could say about this guy at this juncture, the most kind thing we could say, is that he is a case study of cognitive dissonance. Unfortunately, this clip is the beginning of the revealing of something far worse. It's not just cognitive dissonance. I want you to notice how he started. He basically tells Patrick Bet-David, who's a big-time podcaster, big YouTube personality, this will get you clicks. You know why? Because he knows the game. He knows the game. I told you privately off to the side in a conversation we had a week or two ago, Bill, something I'll share with the audience now, that Lex Friedman claims he doesn't look at his numbers. I don't know whether that's true or not, but he said that he doesn't want to get caught in the trap of considering quality to be clicks because they're not the same thing. This is a very, very difficult thing to do in this position, to not pay attention to how many people are tuning into your show. I do it. But Lex said, I have programs that I know are good and they don't get as much audience. And I have programs that I think, they weren't so great. They get lots of audience. So he didn't want to fall into a trap. He thought it was a quality trap, a lack of quality. He just wanted to continue to do the right things for the right reasons and let the results speak for themselves. And they'd kind of average out in the long run. But he wasn't going to stay obsessed with the numbers. So he tries not to look at the numbers. I don't know whether to believe him. I kind of doubt he's telling the complete truth in this case because it's almost impossible not to. We know that people click on the show based on how many people are watching. They decide something's not worth their time because there's not enough people watching. We know this actually impacts.
I asked at the top of the show for subscribe because that helps get the word out.
Right. But this is what you might call a Freudian slip. Now, in the next clip, the situation is about to get even worse character-wise.
Talk about it.
That was wrong. We were given bad information about ivermectin. The real question is why? Everyone's going to say Joe Rogan was right. No, Joe Rogan was saying, yeah, he was right. But that's not what matters. What matters is the entire clinical community knew that ivermectin couldn't hurt you. They knew it, Patrick. I know they knew it. How do I know? Because now I'm doing nothing but talking to these clinicians who at the time were overwhelmed by COVID and they weren't saying anything. Not that they were hiding anything, but it's cheap. It's not owned by anybody. And it's used as an antimicrobial, antiviral in all of these different ways and has been for a long time.
For malaria for over almost 20 years.
Yeah. So, and my doctor, who is now my doctor, was using it during COVID on her family and on patients, and it was working for them. So they were wrong to play scared on that. Didn't know that at the time. Know it now, admit it now, reporting on it now.
Know it now, admit it now, reporting on it now. This is the last clip we're going to play, but we're going to do practically an entire podcast just on this. Fasten your seatbelts, folks. First, they lied about this and they called it horse dewormer as part of their shame game. Mm-hmm. And there are people still using it today. And I want to say to people who are watching right now, some of whom might have been friends with me on Facebook at the time who trafficked in this phrase, I still remember who you are. And you still haven't apologized either. You lied about a medication. Now, you may have believed that it shouldn't have been used. I don't know how you knew, but you lied. You said you engaged in bearing false witness against your neighbor and against a product that's been valid and useful for a long time. And there's a reason these doctors weren't talking, because they knew that they might even be putting their own licenses at risk by advocating for this. The government took extraordinary steps to block. We're going to talk about two things here, but they took extraordinary steps to block the prescription use of this. The discretion that doctors normally have on other stuff. This was an anti-science, anti-graceful, shaming exercise. But you go to a ball game, right, Bill? You're sitting in the stands, you're enjoying the game. Let's say you're at a basketball game, right? And there are cheerleaders right out in front of the stands who are starting to engage the audience in a chant, right? You know, rah, rah, ree, kick him in the knee, rah, rah, ras, kick him in the other knee, right? Yep. They're doing their thing. Maybe the public address announcer's the guy doing it. You know, maybe he's getting everybody to dun, dun, ch, dun, dun, ch. Maybe, you know, okay, right? We're all doing a lot. We're supporting our team at the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, today in the short skirt, Mr. Chris Cuomo, he's bouncing up and down and telling everybody what the cheer is. And that's what he did throughout this entire thing. And that included telling you that how shocking. There is video about this. You can go find it on YouTube. You can find him mocking and insulting Joe Rogan for taking ivermectin. And worse, having the temerity, the gall to talk about it. But I don't know how it happened. I don't know why the doctor said they were overwhelmed. That is emphatically not true. This is incredibly bad behavior. But he's done it right. Not this Joe Rogan character. Okay. Maybe he was right, but it was an accident. He didn't know anything. It was an accident, sheer circumstance. He was listening to some of the wrong people, and he's like a broken clock, Bill. He got it right this time. But you can't start tuning into Joe Rogan now. I was wrong, he was right, but it's just an accident. It's just an accident. He's saying we were given bad info about ivermectin. Who is we, dude? The royal we showing up again. This is evasive language to avoid responsibility. You chose, Mr. Cuomo, to promote these ideas. You sold them. And here's the most extraordinary claim I'm going to make here today. And there may even be people who start writing letters saying, oh, gee, Jim, you aren't very graceful. This is narcissistic deflection. Let me say that better. This is narcissistic deflection. That's an actual condition. It's considered a form of abuse. This guy's blameless. I had nothing to do with this. It wasn't me. Wasn't me. Indeed, we're dumb and he's smart. Everybody who questioned any part of this, we were dumb. He was smart. And in deflection, he can and will go to any lengths. Someone who's engaging in narcissistic deflection will seem as perfect as possible. They will maintain their authority and power and rightness in a given situation. They'll just keep criticizing other people and providing them with negative feedback. It's everybody else's fault but them. Narcissistic deflection. I ask you, Bill, what you just heard, what you just watched, does this seem like repentance to you?
No way. Not even close.
Okay. But was there no way the rest of us could have known? Were we all just silly rubes who were walking around with a set of slogans or anti-government resistance and engaged in partisan tribal behavior? We're just complete idiots, oblivious, just rebelling. We were rebels without a cause. Was that the condition? Here, let me think about some of these things. Everyone could see that the social distancing rules were absurd. Everyone could see it. You go into a restaurant, and when you were standing up, you had to have a mask, and when you sit down, you were allowed to take it off. Did the virus not work below 5 feet? It was as if we were on candid camera. This was like this ongoing science experiment on us and our behavior. This was a giant psychology experiment. Let me give you something even more substantial, because he said we couldn't have known, ergo, let me be more specific. I'm sorry. He said he couldn't know. He didn't know. Ergo, there's no way we could have known. So let me tell you another story. This is an article. Hope everybody can see this. It's called The HCQ Wars Demonstrate That Your Tribalism Has a Good Excuse.
This is a great article. If you haven't seen it, we'll link it in.
Now, that tiny little picture you're seeing there, that's of me. I was the primary author on this, worked with Joanna Blaine at an aborted project that didn't last very long called the Exit Network.
Which, by the way, is how I found you in the first place.
That's exactly how the birth of the show comes out of that short-term project. Sometimes you do little things, they lead to great things. You see the birth of a vision and the death of a vision. This article, the HCQ Wars Demonstrate That Your Tribalism Has a Good Excuse, was posted at the Exit Network, and we will link to this article as well in the show notes. Lots of reference material for you to go back and check context, see who I am, what I said, why I said it, see whether or not I'm treating Chris Cuomo fairly, whether I'm even being graceful. The subtitle of the article is The Politicization of a Potential Lifesaver During a Pandemic, and let me just read the beginning of this article. You don't stand a chance. You really, really don't. Hardly anyone can afford to spend 90 hours of careful research on each aspect of a public debate. Now multiply that times every issue out there. We mere mortals choose tribalism as a method of self-defense. We rely on people we think we can trust and resist people who make us suspicious. Human beings lack the capacity to resist the repetitive and exploitative manipulation by the vote-seeking political forces and ratings-craving public media outlets, the people who run the conflict machine. Tribalism is a self-defense mechanism in response to active political manipulation. Now, the manipulation is so bad that it's resulted in the suppression of, if not outright banning, of contrary narratives. This suppression means it might even be difficult, even impossible, to circulate this article to friends. Their mere mention of the primary drug in the C+ treatment cocktail often led, back then, to social media banning. And when did we invest this 90 hours? When did we publish this? I am sitting here talking to you just a couple days after the anniversary of posting this. This is 2021. This is right at the very, very same time that the government was saying we can take masks off. Same month if you've gotten big shot. This is just a couple of days before Nicholas Wade would release his column that allowed another thing to begin getting discussed for the very first time, something else that would have gotten you banned, instantly removed from Twitter. And that was that there was a lab leak in Wuhan, and there was tremendous evidence for it. That all happened in May of 2021. What hadn't happened yet? The loss of your job for not getting big shot. The mantra coming out of the White House of the pandemic of the unvaccinated. That hadn't happened yet. That was going to come in the months to follow. It was a time where you couldn't talk. So why did we invest at the Exit Network, between Joanna Blaine and I, 90 hours to write a very long article, by the way? This article at printout goes just over 15 pages long. It's a long article. There's some images in here, so let's call it 14 or so. It's a long article. Because if you took HCQ as part of a cocktail in an early treatment phase, your odds of surviving shot up. There was a statistically noticeable effect from taking the HCQ cocktail. And I want to put emphasis on cocktail. There was also a tremendous amount of disinformation. I'm not going to go through all of that. I really, really encourage you to go read this article at the Exit Network. We provide the links in the show notes. I really encourage you to go read it. But it's a story of suppression so that you couldn't get the drug. Now, I'm going to engage in a personal story that has props here today. I told you about my friend who came home from an event that I was at, my colleague who was radicalized by the fact that he took Big Shot and got C+ anyway. A month later, I would get it via my son. I got the variant that they call Delta, which was brutal. It really laid me up. But I had access through a friend, a very gracious friend, someone I'm very grateful to, who hooked me up with a doctor because it was hard to get in to see any doctors who were doing anything out of the norm. Do you want to know what the norm was back then? It was stay home, wash your hands a bit more, and wait. And if it got really, really bad, go to the hospital. That was the entire treatment protocol for the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, the CDC, the NIH, the WHO. That was the universal establishment position. But there were renegade doctors out there, a couple thousand of them actually, across the planet, maybe 10,000 planet-wide, who were giving people who had been through other outbreaks of other types of viruses in the past, and they gave a cocktail to people. And it's very, very important. This article that we covered talks about the importance of having all these things in the package. So in my package, by this point, they'd begun to figure out that ivermectin was there. So I had ivermectin. And I had also the aforementioned hydroxychloroquine. And I had also a booster dose, 50,000 IUs of vitamin D. And I also had azithromycin, which had to do with anti-inflammatory, kind of keeping the cytokine storm from being able to kick into full gear. And then on top of all of that, I was taking vitamin C, vitamin D, quercetin, and zinc, all of which were available over the counter. I don't know whether it made any impact or difference in my particular situation. I really don't. And my case was, I was dealing with some effects of it for up to 6 weeks. And it was hard to get this medicine. So I just talk about HCQ for a second. I just want to talk about HCQ. Grab my HCQ bottle again here. I just want to talk about this bottle because we were advised after we finally did find a doctor who would give me the prescriptions I wanted. And I had already written just a few months before this article. We were advised to get a pharmacy that was not a chain. And so I went to a pharmacy locally that was not a chain and submitted my prescription. And about an hour before we were supposed to go pick it up, we got a call saying, hold off, don't come. We're not going to be quite ready to fill your prescription yet. There's a question about the order. And then at about the time that I should have shown up, about an hour later, I got a call from the pharmacist himself wanting to talk to me. It's one of the most extraordinary conversations I've ever had in my life, Bill. The doctor proceeded to tell me that he couldn't fill the prescription because he suspected I was taking it for this purpose, which was none of his business, and that it was dangerous. Well, I had already done this article, which looked at that question, and I already knew that was wrong. And so I told him so. And in fact, I said, in all due humility, there isn't a single other prescription you could put out that I would know anything about, that I could sit and contend with you about this. But I know about this one. And I know it's not true. And he's like, well, I can't anyway because it's been banned in the state of Ohio. Well, remember, I had done this article, so I knew about that too, and it wasn't true. It was banned for exactly 10 days before the governor lifted the order of the pharmacy board, which was the first time in their history that they said, you can't off-brand prescribe. So I asked him, you're not going to fulfill my prescription, but will you at least read my article? And I got his email address. And when I hung up the phone, Bill, I turned to Susie and I said, when I die, you have this guy's email address. Let him know he killed me. We did get it filled. And by the way, we got it filled at a big chain, a Walgreens. We called up and the pharmacist there said to me, honey, if your doctor prescribed it, we're going to fill it. And I said, that's where I wanted to go in the first place. And we were able to get it filled because this cocktail didn't work after day 7. It was ideal to get it by day 5. And that was a mad rush to pull that off, with having to get the appointment with the doctor and then get the prescription filled.
While you were sick.
Yes. Now, I look at Chris Cuomo with just sadness. I wanted so much, Bill, when I first saw this, to be like, oh, he's woken up. There's been an awakening and he's going to do the right thing now.
Not Chris Cuomo. Not woke.
This is what it looks like when status actors inside the conflict machine start saying things you want said. It comes way too late, and you are still wrong. In fact, you were wrong all along. It's only by their good graces that somehow or other this needs to be discussed right now, because they have the unique knowledge to be able to do it, not you. You can't trust yourself in this supposedly democratic system we have. And I just want to say, if we chose to practice human respect, this wouldn't be happening. Human respect says that we have to choose persuasion over coercion. It says that on the basis that happiness, harmony, and prosperity will be diminished. Was harmony not diminished? Did we see a lot less social grace, social harmony, social peace during that time? Are we still not living with many of the side effects of it to this very hour? So an actual apology, a clear, no excuse admission that he was indeed a propagandist, not a journalist, and that he was wrong would be quite welcome, because that healing is still needed. In fact, I want journalists everywhere to learn from this. Don't be so set on getting clicks.